This was about 25 years ago when I was a young teen, 13 or 14. I'm a female and I'm 38 now. I was dating someone in a rough part of my town, in the UK, and had walked down to his house to hang out. I had left his house to go home around 4 or 5 p.m. and was walking through a small wooded area when something told me to look behind me. I looked behind me to see a guy following me, carrying a baseball bat. I started walking faster and faster, but he kept pace with me, and just remained carrying his bat over his shoulder, like he was gonna swing it. I confronted him once we were out of the wooded area, and asked him what he wanted, but he just stared at me blankly, so I told him to straight up stop following me. I started walking off in a rather quick speed, and he continued to follow me. I lived in a very small town, but it had a number of houses that I could stop at. I knocked on several houses on my route home, but no one was answering, and I didn't want the creep knowing where I lived, so I just kept walking around and going down alleys into people's gardens, but he'd be waiting for me when I thought I evaded him. I ended up going back to my house, hoping that my dad would be home so that he could deal with this creep, but when I got home, my dad wasn't home. I told my mom about it, and she looked out the window. He was there, but all he did was nod his head to her, and then he walked off. I told my boyfriend about the incident, and he went mental over it and asked around to see who it could have been. He found out who it was, gave the guy a polite warning, and started walking me home just in case. I never saw that stalker again. My boyfriend and I split because of distance as I moved to another city when I finished high school. We do still talk occasionally. He's happily married with 4 kids now, and I'm a single parent to 3 kids. It still gives me a shiver down my spine when I think about it though. So this is a repost of a story from March 2019, but I just went to court to testify against him today, so I figured I might as well let you have the whole story. So I lived in a town with 60,000 people, and I've been living and working there for 1.5 years. I don't know many people here, as I work all day and have schoolwork in my free time. Because of this, I've been trying to meet new people and found a Facebook group wanting to hang out. One was suggesting a pre-party before going out, and we were just 6 girls in total. At around 3 a.m., 3 of us decided to go home. One took a taxi, and the other one lives like 3 minutes away from me, so we walked. We were talking, laughing for a few minutes before she went inside, and I started to walk home rather happy and still a bit drunk. I suddenly noticed footsteps and got a bit paranoid, as you do being a woman in your early 20s walking home in the middle of the night. 50 meters further ahead is a public swimming pool, and they still had the lights on, so I decided to leave the sidewalk because usually people are just on their way home themselves and will just keep walking. Not in this case though. As I reached the entrance with all the lights, I turned around and this guy was literally 3 steps behind me. Black male, 35 to 40, slim, with a head strangely small compared to his body, little to no hair, like 5'9", and with creepy nearly white eyes that stood out next to his dark complexion. I asked him why he was following me, and he just mumbled something I couldn't make out. He could have been an immigrant though, so maybe he didn't know Danish. I told him that he shouldn't be following me, and that I'd like him to keep going, but he gave me no response. I then told him that I didn't like being followed and to please move on. He just smiled a creepy smile, and out of nowhere grabbed my hair on the back of my head and pulled me towards him harder than I thought was possible for his size. I fell on top of him, and he got knocked out when his head hit the pavement. I ran across the parking lot to a road at a safe distance when I called 112 while still keeping an eye on him. Really wanted to just run home, but I was also terrified of me landing on him might have killed him or whatever. He attempted to get up a few times, and I was about to run, but I saw the lights from the ambulance coming down the road, so I stayed, and one of them came to check up on me while we waited for the police to arrive. I'm fine. I just have a sore scalp and a bruise on my left arm where I landed on him, but I'm sure he got the biggest headache ever. Karma is a bitch, and here I thought I had ran out of dumb luck a long time ago. Edit. I think I saw him at work yesterday. I work at a pharmacy, so if it was him, I hope he just came in for something for that headache. I looked over the camera footage, and literally the only thing that didn't make it seem like it was him was that he had very dark eyes. But I guess color context is always an option. Second edit. Passed him today on my way home from a run. I was literally 100 meters from my flat, in another direction compared to the swimming pool. I tried not to make eye contact or look too much in his direction, but he was wearing the same exact outfit. He didn't follow me, but I just hope that means that he didn't remember how I looked. Third edit. Never mind. I walked past him today on the street outside the pharmacy as a colleague and I were going to grab some lunch. When I realized it was him, I just looked at my colleague and pretended to be very much into our conversation, but I could feel him staring at me the whole time. I waited a little longer than I usually would to have a second look, and he was staring. I felt like I got busted or something, and like I've just confirmed to him that I was the girl that he attacked. It's honestly a strange feeling because my feelings are currently switching between paranoid, scared, and angry. More than anything, I really want to punch him in his face for making me feel so unsafe. I doubt that would end well for me though. December 2020. Guess it's time for another edit, in case people are still wondering what happened with the case. So apparently he has a few different charges, and today they decided to have me come to court as a witness. Don't know all the charges, but I'm not allowed to know until he's being sentenced, which might take a while. Anyway, they read aloud from the police report, and I'm both confused and annoyed as it doesn't sound like what happened at all. They said that he was drunk and sat on a pillar near me, and Lovely attempted to stroke my hair, which I didn't like, then fell and bumped his head and got knocked out, and that I had left and called the ambulance for him. Like literally what the fuck. Also found out that he probably didn't understand me that evening as he needed a translator today. But I still feel kind of proud that I was brave enough to confront him with the fact that he was following me and to tell him to keep going. At least something positive came out of it. So for background, I used to sleep in a boarding school while I attended high school. That night they asked us to be in front of the school at 4 a.m. to take the bus that would have taken us to the airport. I have asked my mother if she could bring me there, but she wasn't comfortable going into the city with a car at night, and neither was I walking by myself in the unknown city, but I guess she didn't care that much. So it was around 3:40 in the morning. I hadn't slept worth shit because I had bad pizza, indigestion. I had spent the last 5 hours holding my stomach on my bed, covered in sweat, so yeah, that night didn't start off well, but I decided to go take the bus anyways. I didn't want to miss the big trip, although the idea of getting on a plane scared me more than anything. I got up, took my luggage and backpack, and started going towards the city center. The streets were completely empty. Every now and again a car would pass the street, but no one else was around. I was sprinting down the street where the rehabilitation home was. I have nothing against rehabilitation, but call it prejudice. I didn't want to meet anyone who had something to do with drugs and alcohol at 4 a.m. I managed to get in front of the school all in one piece, and there was not a soul around. Where were my classmates? I sat on the bench and started playing with my hands. Sure enough, luck was never a thing. I started hearing some movement behind me. I turned, and the man was slowly crossing the plaza, headed towards me. I ignored him and kept looking at my hands nervously. He definitely was approaching me in a very slow, calm walk. He was wearing a windproof jacket, had gray hair, a wild afro, and a beard. Some of his teeth were missing. He had a friendly smile. "Hey, you brother." I covered my face between my neck and my jacket and my hood. Hey, dude. I'm sorry to bother you, but you see, I need some money. Some money, yeah? As soon as his hand touched my shoulder, I jumped up and backed down. He took me by my shoulders as if we were long-lost friends and proceeded. "I need some money for fries. There's a van that sells them, there, down the street. I just need a few coins for fries." There was in fact a van that sold all kinds of fried and bakery sort of food. The thing is, they're not open before 9 a.m., and it was 4 a.m. The smell of liquor on his breath made me panic. He could have easily punched me and robbed me. He didn't look like a violent guy, but I didn't know what to expect. I thought quickly. I had some spare money. I'd give him some, as I didn't want to piss him off. I told him that I didn't have any cash on me because I was going to the airport, but that I had some coins in my pocket that I'd be glad to give him. This prevented him of seeing my wallet, and sounded like a friendly compromise. He seemed grateful. He took the few coins I had for my coffee. The thing is, it was not over, and it got weirder for both of us. He started overthanking me, a row of thank yous and kind words, and I need to reward you. He was heating his hands over me, and I didn't know what to do. I was so overwhelmed. I hugged him and said that it was no problem. I locked my hands after a few pats on his back and backed up. Okay, what the fuck just happened? I anxiously looked around to spot a classmate at the end of the road with what I remember being her sister. After a while, they noticed me too, but didn't do anything, just stared. The guy thanked me again and said that he needed to show me one more thing, then grabbed my arm and dragged me a few steps. I pointed my feet at the ground, losing my confidence and looking friendly. Please, I gave you money already. You asked for money and I just gave it to you. Now I have stuff to do. He pulled me another time, then let go of my arm and said that he wanted to reward me and that I will see. He then asked me to stay still and wait for him to come back. He then left. A couple of my classmates came the next minute. I was still shocked. I didn't know what the fuck that man wanted, and I was anxious I would see him turning the corner. I then laughed it off with some friends, trying to cope with whatever had happened. A few laughed in disbelief, and one girl took me to the side and asked if I was okay. I wasn't really sure, and she knew it. The classmate I saw at the end of the street said that she saw the man dragging me, and if he would have done something, she would have intervened. I was, and still am pissed off at her. This man was looking for some booze or whatever, and probably wouldn't have hurt me. But what if he had a knife? If he punched me? If he robbed me? If he managed to drag me away from the street? It was already time to intervene, and I can't help thinking that she was just being a coward, and I will never forget. This happened years ago, when I was 16 years old. I was walking home and it was around midnight. There were no people around me besides this very short dude that was walking right behind me. At first I thought nothing of it until I heard him speaking. No other voice, just the one. But he could have been talking on the phone, right? I get this very weird feeling that something isn't right, so I turn around and sure enough he was speaking to me. I can't make out what he's saying because he was speaking another language. My best bet was to cross the street, but he did as well. We repeated the street crossing a couple times until we got to my block. Now my street is a very little narrow street that is part of the old part of town, and it's very dark. If I go into it, he could very possibly hurt me, and no one would be there to help. So I decide to walk a little bit further, where there's a bakery that's 24/7, and it's always packed with people. I stop right in front of it and act like I'm waiting for someone to come out. The guy sees this, and he walks into the bakery and starts looking around, and I finally see him under the bakery lights. He looked disturbed and very dirty. He was short, maybe around 5'2". He was wearing some clothes that were dirty and worn out, and by the look of the customers, I could tell that he smelled very bad. I assume he decided not to be suspicious, and he walks out and starts walking away from me. He didn't know that my street was a couple steps behind me, and I guess he thought once he left, I would keep walking in the same direction. I saw him hiding behind a tree not very far from me. I take this opportunity and slowly start walking backwards to where the street starts, never turning my back to where he is. This was my time to get a little bit ahead. So I start running for my life until I get to my house. I lock the doors with all the lights turned off, and I peek out the window. He is running and looking everywhere, trying to find where I went. I don't even want to imagine what would have happened if I hadn't reacted the way I did. But anyways, I have more stories similar to this because being a woman in my country is very unsafe. Probably the wildest thing that has ever happened to me with a complete stranger. Now, this encounter was not in person, just to note that. I was 14 when this happened, and the man in question was in his mid-30s. I had a large friend group at the time, but out of the 10 people in it, I was only really friends with one of them. All the other ones were his friends, but they were always around. This particular day, one of his friends asked me if he can use my phone to call his coworker because he needed to tell him that he wasn't going to make it to work. I agreed and handed him my phone without thinking twice about it. He says his coworker isn't picking up and gives me back my phone. A couple hours later, my phone rings and I pick up. I don't recognize the voice, but the caller says I called him. I quickly realize what it was and I tell him my friend's name and that he called. The caller thanks me and hangs up. I thought that would be the end of it, but boy, I was wrong. Almost right away, I started getting texts from this number, telling me my voice sounded sexy. I just ignored all of them. The next day I get a text from him. "Do you not want to talk to me?" I responded with a simple no. He replies, "Well, if you don't want to text me, Sarah, then I could just come by." He knew my address and my name. I am terrified at this point, so I asked my friend if he gave any information about me to his coworker. He tells me that the guy asked him whose phone he called from, and he gave him my name. He asked him if I lived close, and he gave him my actual address. My friend also mentions his age when I told him that he's texting me, but he said that I'm overreacting and that a 30-year-old wouldn't even bother with me. So I text him back saying that if he has that information on me, he must know my age too, right? He says he doesn't mind my age as long as I don't. What follows is a month of constant calls every single day. He would get angry if I didn't pick up and start texting me nasty things and calling me names. Please don't judge me for not calling the police or telling my parents. I was only 14 and scared that he would hurt me or my family. One day it all came to an explosion that was building up for months. He kept calling my phone until my younger brother got annoyed and answered it, telling him to leave me alone. He had no idea it was a stalker. I just told him it was some random person calling me. He then sent me a couple texts telling me to get ready because he was going to kill me and my brother for speaking to him like that. I went outside to cry, and that's when my neighbor saw me crying. He was older than me, but his brothers were the same age. He asked me why I was crying, and I told him everything. I just couldn't keep it in any longer. He was calm and told me to give him the guy's number, which I did. About 15 minutes later, my phone started blowing up with text. He was calling me a whore. He then said, "You have the nerve to send the bastard that you're having sex with and have them call me?" He was extremely angry. He somehow knew where I was going the next day. It was something I planned for months with my friends. He told me that was where he would kill me, and I would pay for being such a little bitch. I still went because we had been planning it for months. Thankfully, my neighbor suggested to go with me and keep a distance just in case the threats were real. They weren't. He never showed up that day, and I'm so thankful he didn't. That was the end of the calls and texts. To this day, I'm still terrified that he will somehow see me outside and possibly hurt me. One phone call ruined many months for me. Okay, so this took place a long time ago. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I was probably between 7 and 9. My family and I were all queued up at the bus stop when this guy approaches us asking for money. He said something about he hasn't eaten in a while and that he doesn't have a single cent on him. This is pretty normal where I live, so we weren't exactly freaked out or anything at the time. So my mom dug her hand in her purse and handed him some cash and wished him well. The adults returned to their conversation, but I noticed that he hadn't left. What's weird is that we were in the middle of the queue, so it couldn't have been that he was just queuing up after us. Everyone else eventually notices this and tries not to acknowledge whatever this was because, I guess, everyone probably just assumed that he wasn't exactly sane at this point. When the bus arrived, we all hopped on, and me being the child I ran all the way to the back to sit alone. Those seats were considered the best seats. Then I see the same guy board the bus and walk in my direction. I immediately grabbed my grocery bag and placed it on the seat next to me because I didn't want him to sit there, because I had a feeling he would. Sure enough, he stops right next to me and just stares down at me. At this point, I was completely creeped out, mainly because I had no idea what he wanted. Everyone began to turn and stare, so I lifted the grocery bag and he immediately plunges down right next to me. I looked through the window throughout the whole trip, which wasn't long, about 10 minutes. I was seated on the inside next to the window, so when it was my stop, he had to either get up or turn his body to let me slide through to get out. Surprisingly, that's exactly what he did when we got to our stop. Thank God he hadn't followed us then. Another thing I noticed, that he didn't have a card and he didn't pay for the fare when he got on the bus and somehow got away with it. Last night, I was scared out of my mind. As I was on my way home, a man came up to me and started talking to me. He said something along the lines of, "Hey beautiful," and whatnot. I replied back, "Get away from me." I then noticed he had a cup of alcohol in his hand, and I immediately regretted saying anything. He turned aggressive right away and proceeded to call me a stupid dumb white bitch and to get the fuck out of so-and-so. I diagonally crossed the street, and he continued down and crossed another street, but he kept screaming at me, saying that I'm a dumb bitch and that he was gonna beat my ass and mess me up. Being a dummy and having too much pride, I yelled back, "Suck my dick and shut the fuck up." Clearly, I should have not aggravated him more, but it was in the heat of the moment. There were a few people around, so I felt okay, and he was walking away. But when I turned the street, all the other people were gone. That's when he started following me. I could hear him screaming slurs behind me and his footsteps stomping down the pavement. I was so scared. I started to speed up my walking, but I didn't want him to know that I realized that he was right behind me. I thought to knock on the neighbor's door for help, but I was too afraid. I called my mom and started crying on the phone because I didn't know what would happen. She thought I was pranking her. I could hear him getting closer, and I grabbed my keys and bolted to my front door. Both of my hands were shaking so bad that I couldn't even unlock it. I started banging on it for someone to open it, and finally they did. I got in and fell on the hallway floor, just crying. I looked up and saw a shadow at the door and started screaming my ass off, only to realize it was my roommate checking to see what happened. I felt so much relief in that moment. I'm really scared to leave my house now because he knows where I live. I just hope he was too drunk to remember anything. I feel really traumatized. This is a story about the time I had a full-blown stalker, and everyone knew and just pretended it was fine. When I was 16, I moved into a new apartment. It was a huge apartment complex. I had previously only lived in a very rural area in the middle of nowhere. So one night, I decided to get changed while dancing in front of my full-wall window at night. The window acted like a mirror due to the light inside and the darkness outside. So I did an entire striptease in front of that thing. Yes, I was stupid. When I was done, I looked out my window for whatever reason, and I saw a silhouette of a man standing in his window across the street on a higher floor. I shut my blinds but thought nothing of it. A few days later, I get a call. The person tells me that he loves me. He knows my name, my mom's name, my address, what school I went to, and obviously my phone number. He knew everything. I told my mom about the stripping incident and about the phone call. She brushed it off. One time, my boyfriend was over, and the stalker called me crying, asking how I could do this to him. When I went away for a weekend, he called me hundreds of times a day. If I answered, he'd say nothing. His silhouette was always watching me. Somehow, instead of panicking about this, my boyfriend, mom, and even me made jokes about it. None of us really cared too much about it. One day, after 6 months of this, the calls just stopped. I never saw him in his window again. It just ended. But this could have ended so badly for me. And honestly, I wonder what the fuck my mom was thinking about ignoring something so serious. He could have shown up at my door at any time. He knew exactly where I was. Thinking back on it, it was probably the most dangerous situation I've ever been in. I was just thinking about this for some reason, and thought this is the kind of stuff that would fit on this subreddit. Many people might not think it's scary enough, but to me it's definitely a creepy encounter. This happened when I was in secondary school, in the UK. I was probably about 12 or 13. I lived in a pretty safe neighborhood from what I can remember, but the town itself has definitely taken a turn for the worse in the past few years. To get home from school, I would sometimes walk with some of my friends going the same way. We would walk through a big busy park where people would walk their dogs and where children would sit and talk on the swings after school. On this particular day, I was walking home with a friend and her younger brother, who was a year below us, if I'm remembering correctly. I'm not sure exactly how it transpired, but we were approached by a woman who was obviously completely spaced out on some kind of drug. I probably didn't realize this at the time because I was quite naive when I was younger. The woman had probably said something along the lines of asking us for money. But before I knew it, my friend and her brother had started running away, shouting, screaming, and laughing. I quickly followed as I didn't want to be left behind with this random woman. We ran down the street, and after a second or two, we realized that the woman was now chasing us. She was angrily screaming at us. My house was nearby, and being a young stupid kid, I just assumed that it would be the safest bet. Now, if I was ever in that same situation, I don't know whether the best decision would be leading a drugged up person chasing me back to my house, but I was young and scared. I was so lucky in that moment that my stepfather was home. We were banging on the door, screeching and shouting. He came to the door and shouted at the woman to get off his property and that she was clearly on drugs and needed to go away. Throughout the whole experience, my friend and her brother were laughing, thinking that it was all fun and games or something. This was so confusing to me, and as soon as my stepfather got rid of the woman, I broke down in tears and thanked him for helping us. I think I was already interested in true crime and stuff like that at that age, so I saw the situation of what it could have become, and they just thought it was funny that a crazy lady was chasing us. Or maybe it was just like a trauma response, like laughing in uncomfortable situations. I still don't know for sure though. My stepfather wasn't the easiest person to live with, but I'm grateful for him being there to protect us, as who knows what would have happened if there was no one at home. This took place 2 years ago. I just recently turned 19. I was a college freshman going to school in a small town in South Louisiana. My parents were the pull yourself up by your bootstraps type. Having done their best to instill the strong work ethic in me growing up, they'd expect me to pay for my own tuition, with no help from them whatsoever. Not gonna lie, I was a little annoyed at first. I didn't mind paying my own way, but I was concerned about the impact working all those hours would have on my social life, as I wanted the full college experience. I started working part-time as a waiter at a local seafood restaurant. Shifts were limited and tips were scarce. My dad recommended supplementing my income through yard work, saying I could use his riding lawnmower and leaf blower. Anyway, I started making pretty good money mowing lawns, managing to snag a few clients through word of mouth. My best friend Blaze was working as a cashier at a local corner store while he attended a nearby college. He happily recommended my lawn care service to any customer or coworkers. I was ecstatic. I was not only making enough money to pay for school, but I even had a little left over to get my beat up old truck some much needed repairs. He told me about a guy he worked with at the store, a slightly older guy, mid-20s I believe. His name was Alex. He was quiet, didn't smile much, a bit of a loner type. It didn't matter to me, I was only looking to make cash. He said he needed someone to mow his front and backyard, as he didn't really have the time. He didn't really elaborate to what he did outside of working at the grocery store, but I guessed it wasn't much. So my friend gave me Alex's number. No big deal, right? After all, I was going to give it out to anyone who might have been even the least bit interested in my services. Turns out that was the start of what would be a year-long nightmare. Alex texted me on Saturday morning, a day after my friend and I had talked. It was pretty cordial and simple, nothing more than, "Hey man, what's up? Your friend told me that you cut grass." I gave him an affirmative, and then asked if he would like me to come over, and how frequently, given how often it rained here in South Louisiana. He simply told me to come over later that day, and that he wasn't sure if he could afford me on a weekly basis. Whatever, I thought. Maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement. I immediately hopped out of bed, got dressed, and drove to where he lived, which was located on the far side of town, across the bayou. His house wasn't located in the nicest of neighborhoods. Many of the houses were run down, seemingly in a state of disrepair. The yards were thick with grass, knee-high length if I remember correctly. I didn't think any of those people could afford to pay me even a quarter of what I charged at the time, which wasn't much, at around $45. I finally made my way to Alex's place, which didn't look all bad compared to the other houses. Horizontal siding painted a soft pastel blue, sat atop dark gray bricks, with a cracked bay window in the front. I parked my truck on the side of the street and shot him a text stating that I had arrived. He came out of his house in a wrinkled t-shirt and pajama pants, looking as if he just woke up. "Hey," I said, smiling as I usually do. "Rough night?" I asked jokingly. He didn't respond, just blinked and ran his hand through his dark blonde hair for what felt like an eternity, but realistically could have been less than a minute. We both stood in complete silence. His dark green eyes bore into me. I avert my gaze, catching sight of a fallen branch that had broken off a large oak tree in his front yard. We had just got hit by a hurricane a few days earlier. "So how'd you guys weather the storm?" I asked, my eyes affixed to the broken branches and scattered leaves. He simply shrugged and said, "Okay." It occurred to me that I might have been speaking to the wrong person. "You're Alex, right? You work with my friend at Village Market?" He nodded. What the fuck was with this guy? I thought. I just kept smiling, as I always did when I would get especially nervous. I told him that I have a lot of clients to get to that day, and that I better get started as soon as possible. He just nodded and pointed to the back gate on the side of the house. He started walking, and I followed. It was a sizable backyard, children's toys scattered almost everywhere. There was a cluttered tool shed next to the fence far off to the left. I did my best to hide my disgust as I nearly stepped in some dog shit. It was weird. The backyard was like a minefield of dog shit, yet no dog to be found. I brushed the thought away and just went to work. Alex didn't bother me or really interact with me at all that day. He seemed really friendly via text. I just chalked it up to him being really socially awkward, like my friend said. He paid me once I finished mowing his lawn, and then I went on my way. Later that night, he texted me again. He apologized for how he acted, saying that he was just tired from the night before, and that he wasn't sleeping well and under a lot of stress. I replied that I understand completely, and asked him if he needed me next week. He ignored my question, and asked if I could suggest anything from Pelicans on the Bayou, the restaurant where I'd been working. At first I was taken aback by the question. I wasn't sure how he knew I worked there, but then it occurred to me that my friend must have told him. I recommended the battered chicken wings, and he thanked me. We started texting back and forth the next few days. He asked me questions about my life, nothing too personal. He'd make inappropriate jokes, nothing I couldn't handle though. He seemed like a pretty cool guy when we talked via text. Strangely, most of our conversations happened late at night or early in the morning hours on weekends. Again, I didn't mind, because he was a paying customer, and I was a friendly guy. About a month had passed when my friend Blaze had sent me a screenshot of a text he received from Alex. It was supposedly a text sent by me, saying all sorts of horrible things to Alex, like, he's a fucking loser who'd never get laid and needed to get a real job. Shit like that. I couldn't believe what I was reading. In the fake text, he even threw some homophobic slurs, which offended me greatly since I had a gay uncle that I was really close to. I decided it would be best just to ignore him. This guy was clearly unwell, trying to start shit with someone he barely knew. He texted me a few days later, acting as if he'd done nothing wrong. The text kept coming. He chatted with me like we were longtime friends. My patience grew thin. I finally snapped and messaged him back. Dude, I know what you did. If you know what's best for you, you'll leave me alone. He feigned ignorance at first, and then proceeded to apologize profusely. I didn't care at that point. I didn't know that guy at all. He was nothing to me. I was busy with my school and work, and I had absolutely no time for any of his drama. I blocked his number. I thought I was over, but I couldn't have been more wrong. A few weeks later, I received another text, this time from a completely different number. It was Alex, again with more apologies. I blocked the number. I figured that he would finally take the hint and leave me alone. He didn't. He ended up adding me on Snapchat using the fake profile. I accepted his request. The name looked familiar, so I thought nothing of it. He asked me if I still worked at Pelicans. I told him that I didn't, as I kept cutting my hours. He then asked if I was still cutting grass. I told him that I was, but for only close friends and family members, as I had a bad experience with a former client. He then proceeds to ask me for details. By then, I figured out it was Alex. I told him to leave me alone, and that if he didn't, I was going to the police. I then received a text from my girlfriend at the time, asking me if I knew a guy named Troy. He supposedly saw me cheating with another girl at some party. I told her everything that was going on. She wasn't sure if she believed me, as I did have a history of playing the field. I told her that I was completely faithful to her, and this guy was fucking nuts. She told me that I better start collecting evidence, taking screenshots of his texts he sent, and that's exactly what I started doing. Most of the texts were pretty benign, just more of him asking me for forgiveness. Then late, one Saturday night, he sent me another text. This time, it was a picture of my house. I was drinking with a few buddies of mine at the time, Blaze included. I immediately showed them the text. He suggested that we call the cops. Some of my more aggressive friends suggested we go outside and beat his ass. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't really want to get the cops involved, but I certainly didn't want to go outside, not knowing if he had a weapon of some kind. I told everyone to just stay in the house and not to do anything. I peeked through the blinds and saw nothing. He couldn't have been there for long. He must have left as soon as he had taken the picture. I didn't hear from him for a few weeks. Blaze, along with the other two cashiers, asked to not work the same shift with Alex. I was hoping maybe it was finally over. Maybe he moved on to someone else. Then on a cold, early October evening, I came home from class to find my mother shaken. I'd never seen her like that before. I asked her what was wrong. She was speechless, trembling almost. She showed me what she found laying on her front porch. It was a large manila envelope with Instagram pictures of me, with my eyes scratched out and red X's drawn on my face. A chill went down my spine. I don't think I've ever been this afraid in my life. Like I had never known real fear up until that point. My mom insisted that we go to the police. I agreed. She ended up talking to a close family friend who knew the sheriff. A couple of officers came to the house, took our statements, told us that if Alex ever came by again, to call them immediately. I didn't hear from Alex again after that. He was fired from the grocery store. The owner caught him stealing from the register. Life went on, months went by, and I felt like I could finally breathe again. Then one day when I was running errands for my mom, I saw Alex standing on the side of the road. He was holding up a clipboard sign, asking for money. He locked eyes with me. They were cold and emotionless. I could feel that familiar shiver creeping up my spine. It was as if everything had came to a complete standstill. After I regained my senses, I sped off, hoping that would be the last I ever see of him.